Hello, this is the 208th edition of Catch of the Day, available on the Branch Talk YouTube channel. Today we're going to continue reading from a book written by Doug Mitchell entitled The Four Carpenters, The Ensign, The Time of Jacob's Trouble, and The First Deliverance. Starting at the top of page 47, it reads, "It appears that he is also saying that the antitypical Zerubbabel, who has begun the work of reform, applies to his work, as he is the one who had begun that work. Why would he at first apply Zerubbabel to those who began the work in 1844, and then later apply it to his own reform work? There are a few different reasons, the first of which concerns his statement. Zerubbabel, being a signet to the antitype, by laying the foundations and finishing the house, denotes that the finishing of the spiritual house, the completeness of the church of God, numbering of the saints, is to be accomplished in one generation in the life of a man commencing in 1844. 2 SR 280. The byword of the early Adventists was, "This gospel in all the world in this generation," Shepherd's Rod Volume 2, was published in 1932, 88 years after 1844. Therefore, by some reckonings of a generation in the life of a man commencing in 1844, the time for the completion of the spiritual house, that time may have seemed like it was about up in 1932. In reading the Shepherd's Rod, volumes 1 and 2, one can conclude that Brother Hodder was expecting the purification of the church to take place almost momentarily. But 14 years later, in 1946, when he applies the words "this generation" to his work, the idea that the generation that began in 1844 would see the fulfillment of the expected Reformation must have seemed to be unrealistic, since that was then 102 years after 1844. So it is reasonable to conclude that those circumstances made it necessary to amend his thinking in regards to what is meant by this generation, and thus who or what Zerubbabel represents. Now, in 2012, that we are 168 years after 1844, the idea of this generation being the life of a man, and that it was to commence in 1844, does not seem to be the correct way to understand the issue. The idea that Brother Hodder is the antitypical Zerubbabel because he began the work of reform has led some Davidians to presume that since he is dead, there are to be no more prophets until the special resurrection, when he will come forth and take up his work again. The thinking is that since Zerubbabel is said to have begun the work of building the temple, and he is to also finish the work, then he alone will lead out in finishing that work. But as we shall see later, there is more to the matter of the hands of Zerubbabel that precludes that thinking. As our focus at this point of our study is on the hands of Zerubbabel and how that relates to the Lord's feet, we'll return to that subject and look further into the issue of in this generation later. Another reason why Brother Hodder first applied the antitype of Zerubbabel to the founders of the movement in 1844, and then later to his own work, is that he was looking more at the general aspect of the texts rather than at all of the detailed specifics thereof. and was seeing that the antitypical Zerubbabel is the one who the Spirit was to use to begin and finish the work. All these taking place at this particular time, and the prophecies now unfolded, prove that antitypical Zerubbabel must now be here, and that as he has started the work, he also must finish it. The fact that inspiration takes the pains to tell who is to finish the work in itself is proof that there must be active usurpers of his office, as there were of Moses' office, 1 TG 14, 21 and 22. As the work of building the second antitypical temple is to be done under the direction of the prophets of the Lord's feet, by their messages, hands, then the work that the Lord's feet are to accomplish is the same as that which Zerubbabel is to accomplish. That is, the Lord's feet are to remove the obstacles and hindrances, and Zerubbabel is to direct the work of reform, thus making the building of the temple possible. But note that he says that there must also be active usurpers of his office, as the work of Zerubbabel in building the temple was to continue under the guidance of the Spirit until the work is accomplished, see track 8.3, then those usurpers must be false prophets, men and women who say we need not look for the unrolling of the scroll, or those who put private interpretations upon the scriptures or the testimonies of the Spirit. Thank you. Take care.